Roman Catholic Church, the medieval church, the church was seen as over the state and all other spheres and callings. The radical Protestants, the Anabaptists, saw the church versus the state and culture. Christians aren't to have anything to do with the secular culture. But the Reformers advocated the church and the state as two distinct ways in which God operates in the world, one by providence and one by saving grace. There are different spheres over which Christ rules, but differently. The Reformers emphasized that only in Israel was the church ever a nation. Only in Israel was the church also a nation. It was a geopolitical theocracy. Calvin pointed out that the national constitution of Israel, all of those laws that governed Israel as a nation and made it a holy people consecrated to God, that national covenant was annexed or stapled to the everlasting moral law that never changes. So the great commandment, love God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself, that never changes. But there were all of these other laws, ceremonial and civil laws, that were annexed or stapled to that commandment for that period in redemptive history. The Old Covenant saints were not dual citizens. To belong to the nation of Israel was to belong to God's people, was to belong to his family. Every vocation was sacred. Every vocation, every calling was subject to detailed laws for society as well as worship. But in this time between Christ's two comings, the kingdom of God is not identified with any temporal power or temporal nation. And that's why you have the Sermon on the Mount, which is rather different. Jesus says, you've heard it said, drive out the Canaanites and the Hittites and the otherites. I say, pray for your enemies and for those who persecute you. It's a regime change. In this time between the times, the gospel goes out with power, but it's not as if God has given up on the world and now he's just focusing on the church. He still upholds the world by his providence and care. And so now the Sermon on the Mount is stapled to that everlasting moral law as the marching orders for the New Covenant church. Like Augustine, Luther emphasized the distinction between things heavenly and things earthly. Unbelievers can know quite a lot about things earthly. It's when we bring secular knowledge into the realm of understanding God and his ways with us that we pervert the truth about things heavenly. Luther put forward his doctrine in detail in his important work on temporal authority in 1523. He complained, the devil never stops cooking and brewing these two kingdoms into each other. In the devil's name, the secular leaders always want to be Christ's masters and teach him how he should run his church and spiritual government. Similarly, the false clerics and schismatic spirits always want to be the masters of the world.